Integrated Water Resource Management Plan for the City of East Hampton. Before I introduce Neil Kulikowskis from Kleinfelder, I just wanted to get into the nuts and bolts of this. I just want to explain to you that we actually have two consulting firms working on this. One has detailed knowledge of our water system, and the other one has detailed knowledge of our sewer system. So they're working together and collaborating to make one plan, and therefore they don't have to reinvent the wheel on a lot of things, and it's saving us some money. So at that, I'll bring up Neil and we'll get started, go through this.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks for coming tonight. You know, I think the city's really embarking on a very important project here, and we're excited to tell you a little bit about it tonight. Really, this is our first of 4 planned public workshops. Really the goals, which I'll get into a little bit more specifics, but the goals of this meeting is to really just give you an overview of what we're doing. Really just kind of we're not going to get into the details. I think some of the further workshops that we have will definitely dive into some of the details. We'll have some results, some hard numbers, even onto the recommendations later on in the project. But really the goal here was to solicit input, certainly from what we consider key stakeholders in the project. So what we did is we advertised it publicly. Certainly there was a public notice in the paper, but we also reached out to a number of groups by letter, by email, by phone call, basically asking them to participate in this process with us. And so it's really, you know, again, our goals are to give you a good overview of what the project is and to gain your input. So with that, I'll get started. Again, my name is Neil Kulikowskis from Kleinfelder. So again, take you through introductions of the whole team. We've got a few people here tonight, and some members of the city staff also that are here tonight. I'm going to tell you really what an IWRMP is. It's really a mouthful, right? So I'm going to try and break that down for you, give you a little bit of a easier understanding of that. Talk a little bit more detail about the role of public participation and why it's part of this project and why it's so important. A little bit about what the different water resources are in the city. Talk a little bit in detail. Probably half of the presentation we're going to spend talking about the water infrastructure systems, really the drinking water, the wastewater, and the stormwater systems. Then again, bring you up to speed on the status, talk about next steps, and at the end, certainly some time for questions and comments. I'd encourage you, if you do have something, a good thought, feel free to raise your hand, ask a question. We do have a presentation to kind of keep us on point, to keep us on schedule. But by all means, if you want to ask a question during the presentation, please do so. If you want to wait till the end, we can do that as well. So introductions, again, Neil Kulikowskis from Kleinfelder. That's a mouthful, but certainly can give you my information. With me is David Peeling from Kleinfelder. Dave's going to be talking about the water system, the drinking water system. Dave and I always Papalarzik. I've said it 100 times. I can say my last name, but I still have trouble saying Dave. So instead of Dave's from Ty and Bond. He's covering the wastewater system. So Dave's working closely with the city and the wastewater. And his past has involved basically working for the city on their wastewater. So he's got the history of the system as well, and also Elizabeth Baldwin from Ty and Bond is here as well. So from the city side, Joe Pitchinsky, sorry, Patty with Joe, Jim Gracious here, and Jim's the city engineer. And Tom Newton, who manages the water system. So we really got really the bases covered for the city's utilities. Pretty big team. So we're collaborating fairly often on this project. We've got some pretty lofty goals, and we're all communicating pretty closely throughout. So what's an IWRMP? So I tried to break it down. Integrated. So the key here is we're looking at these 3 systems at the same time. And that's really key. Historically, or what you would typically see is on an as-needed planning basis, we would look at individual systems. So we might plan and look at the water system in the mid-90s. the wastewater system would be looked at in the mid-2000s, and quite honestly, stormwater is kind of the forgotten utility and hasn't gotten a lot of attention, and in terms of overall planning. So by doing all three systems at the same time, integrated, we're able to ultimately develop a capital plan that can rank these projects against each other. And I think the paper did a good job of kind of simplifying that. There was an article in the paper yesterday, and it's basically, historically, these projects compete against each other for funding. And so we're trying to look at them as a whole and prioritize them as a whole versus really water resource priority and available funding as to which ones get done first. So the water resources, again, it's water infrastructure, but we're also looking at what are the critical natural water resources in the city, and a management plan. So this plan is going to lay out basically long-term maintenance, management, and capital projections for these three systems. That's really the goal. So and basically we'll summarize this in one comprehensive document, and it's going to be a pretty comprehensive document. That's it'll essentially be a living document, a living capital plan that will need to be updated every so often, but it will be comprehensive. That's the key. So what are the steps? So really global top level steps are understanding, we need to understand the natural environment, what are the water resources versus the built environment. What's the city's planning documents? What's the zoning look like? What's the commercial versus industrial versus residential mix, and in what areas? We need to understand that. So we've done a lot of research and really summarizing that. A needs analysis. So we'll look at these systems, and based on certain factors, what they need. And there's a lot of different factors. It's not just condition. Condition's like the obvious one in the room, but there's a lot of different competing factors that builds into a needs analysis. And once we understand the needs, we'll look at different alternatives and for addressing those needs, ultimately come up with recommendations that are integrated into a capital improvement plan. So I'll pause there for a second, and that's a lot to kind of take in, and I went through it pretty quickly. I guess, are there any questions? Is there any, most of the eye contact I'm getting is pretty good and pretty positive, getting some head shakes, but if there are any misunderstandings or clarifications, now would be a good time. Nobody wants to go first, and that's fine. Again, we'll be available to answer questions at the end. So, public participation, and I do definitely appreciate everyone that is here tonight. It's a key part of this process, and as we're getting into the whole planning of this, and really, in terms of scoping it with Joe, working with Joe several years ago, quite honestly, in thinking about this project and who it would affect and what it would entail. It's a pretty aggressive task, and trying to incorporate all the different groups. And we listed out all the groups that we felt might have some sort of want to have some sort of input into this process, and it's a pretty long list. And again, in order for this project to be successful long term, it's important that we raise the public awareness of what these needs are. Because at the end of the day, it's going to come down to spending money and how it's being spent. And the more we can do to raise the public awareness about that and raise the public understanding for that, the more successful ultimately the project will be. But one of the I guess takeaways. So we'll have 4 workshops and 1 public hearing. The public hearings will be on the final report and final recommendations at the end of the project. The workshops are going to be staged, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that. They're going to be staged kind of as we do the work. So again, this one's kind of an introductory one, and as we move forward through the project, those workshops will reflect where we are in the project. And the last key piece here is identifying a key stakeholder group. So when I look around this room, I'm anticipating that some people in this room will be part of that key stakeholder group. And really this is, again, targeted groups that we really are soliciting input from. And you know, I did circulate the sign-in sheet, and you know, as the meeting closes and we review the attendance and review who was there and who had input, we'll start forming a group of people that we will want to keep involved throughout this process. And so I definitely appreciate you coming here, and I'm sure that some people in the room here will be part of that group. So quickly, I just want to touch on the water resources. So we're looking at all the brooks, you know, all the ponds, and you know, kind of globally from East Hampton, and really, you know, some of them are on the borders, and you know, we're considering those as well. Go ahead, Dave. And there's known water quality issues in many of these streams. That's no different than most towns across the state. And there's categories, so we're aware of those. You know, that's kind of our first level of review. That's basically a desktop data review. When we get into the stormwater piece, we're going to look at watershed management and really look at each catchment area and prioritize those catchment areas. And really the priority is going to be based on really the level of contamination or potential contamination in those areas. And that'll end up driving what we do in the stormwater piece, but these are just some of the things that, you know, we definitely need to take into consideration when we're putting together this prioritized capital improvement plan. Some of these areas that are impaired are going to get priority over other areas. And really the critical, probably the most critical natural water resource in the area is the Barnes Aquifer. And you know, I think in terms of protecting the aquifer and prioritizing the improvements to continue to protect the aquifer, and the aquifer certainly has a pretty established support group, and you know, we'd like to definitely involve them and continue to work with them to support this project, because really, as you can see, it's, you know, the aquifer, I'm sure I'm telling a lot of people here in this room something they already know, but it's a regional water supply for 3 communities, plus Holyoke has a number of private wells on the aquifer as well. So 60,000 residents are getting drinking water from the Barnes Aquifer. And there's a number of contamination threats between underground storage tanks, hazardous materials, the sewer overflows, septic systems, road maintenance, hazardous waste. There's a lot of potential contaminants out there. So we're definitely keeping the Barnes Aquifer high on our list of critical natural resources. So I get to stop talking now. Dave Peeling's going to talk about the drinking water system. Again, now's a kind of a little break. We're going to go through the drinking water system, the wastewater system, and the stormwater system. And again, if you have questions, I'll certainly take them now, or we can.
Just one comment. As far as the drinking water system goes, the last time we did a water management plan for the water system was like 1985. So that plan has been obsolete for many, many years.
Yeah, those dates I threw out were just arbitrary.
All right, thanks a lot. I'm Dave Peeling again, and I'm going to lead off here. We're going to shift gears just a bit, like Neil mentioned, and talk a little bit about infrastructure now and what the city of East Hampton owns. And you know, you hear about infrastructure nationally and how there's so much aging infrastructure and the amount of investment that's going to be required around the corner, all around the country. And East Hampton's in the same boat. You own a lot of valuable assets. You have a lot of infrastructure out there. And part of our goal here is to figure out from many different angles how to address infrastructure needs proactively and in a way that's supportive of your natural resources and reflects the values of the community as far as what's prioritized and how projects interplay. And as we go forward into future workshops, we want to talk more specifically about some of those things. But what we thought we'd do tonight for this infrastructure portion is at least just go through a little spin through the city here and kind of show you what assets you have in your various utility systems. So everyone just starts from the same place and has a good understanding of what infrastructure is out there and what potential needs might need to be addressed, so everyone kind of can have an informed discussion as we move forward in the project. So I'm going to start out with the drinking water system here, and this is just a map of the system. All those dark blue lines represent water mains that are bringing your drinking water to your homes and businesses. There are a couple pink shapes there around. Those represent either a water supply, the little triangles, if you can make those out, or one of your groundwater wells. Your sources all come from your groundwater. There are 3 tanks that are circles in each of the 3 corners of the city, and then there's a treatment facility along with some wells down in sort of the lower right corner. But you can kind of get a sense of the coverage and the extent of the water system covering the full city. So as far as getting into this project, what are some of the priorities, some of the drivers for us as we look at the water infrastructure? First, you are very fortunate to have very high quality water here. In fact, just this year, you won a national award for the best tasting water in the United States. Massachusetts was represented by East Hampton, and Massachusetts was the winner down in Washington, D.C. So that's not a small thing. There are a lot of systems where they really have aesthetic challenges. They really have poor water quality that people really put up with. So you have a good thing. So we want to protect a good thing. Do no harm first, right? We want to look ahead for your city and see, what do you need in the future? Is the city growing? Is major business leaving? What's the right number? What sort of supply are we trying to meet in the future? Right now, about 2 million gallons a day of water, approximately on an average day, are supplied to the city. That can close to double on a max day, up to 3.5 million gallons supplied to all the residents and businesses in the city. So that's where you are today. Is it going to look the same 20, 30 years from now? We want to be sure that the water system remains reliable, and that's from all aspects. That goes from maintaining a reliable resource, so nothing's overdrawn where you start losing that reliability, that the infrastructure itself remains reliable and has redundancy, so all the city residents depending on their drinking water can be assured that will keep being delivered regardless. And we also want to look at things like fire protection. All the fire protection in the city is through your water system. And we also want to look at just the condition of the assets and make sure things are deteriorating, we understand that, and we can prioritize things correctly. So those are some of the drivers as we looked at all the assets in the system. So here we're going to do a little tour now of your system, in case you don't know all the assets. A main focus of the water system is the Hendrick Street well and treatment facilities. Most recently, you have a nice facility there that was constructed in 1995, so it's still relatively new. You have a treatment system there, which is aeration, just applying air to remove some contaminants and get the water to full good quality with a little bit of chlorine dosed at that facility. You've got offices, a laboratory, garage, a couple different things all at this location. And actually, there's 3 separate buildings. There's the pump station that withdraws the water and sends it over to the treatment facility itself, that includes the lab and garage, and also a cold storage building on the site. So those all together make up the system. And I pulled that picture off of Jim's wall yesterday, just showing how far back this supply goes. Even though your new facility is 1995, this goes back to, I think, 1908 is the time frame. I don't know when that picture was taken, but you can see some of the wells being put in the ground, and they actually are flowing up through the well. So again, kind of blessed to have that type of water supply in town here. So if we move on, here are some pictures of the facility. So that top left is the pump station that houses the pumps that withdraw the water and send it over to the treatment building, which is the lower left. And you can see the size of that. You can sort of see the garage bays through the light there on the screen, but that is sort of a main facility. And then that picture on the right there shows the tower where the treatment of the drinking water at this facility takes place. So then one other just kind of interesting piece of the Hendrick Street site is this building on the upper left there is the original treatment facility, I think Tom was telling me. So that goes back approaching a century at this point. I'm not sure exactly the date that was fully constructed, if that goes back to 1908 or not. So you can see that it's a nice old utility building, good condition, and there's a picture of it as it is today in the lower right. So you can see it has some just weathering and deterioration over time. That's the type of thing we want to look out for and see before we lose a valuable asset like this. What do we need to do to protect this, if it makes sense to protect it and it fits into an overall long-term plan. So that type of comparison, you do have some old infrastructure and things do start to deteriorate over time. So aside from that Hendrick Street site, you do have, just as far as supplies and sources in your water system, you have a total of 5 pump stations, counting Hendrick Street. So that first picture we saw is one of those 5. 4 of those 5 have had some sort of update in the last 20 years. So as far as infrastructure goes, that's relatively recent work on those facilities. There's one source that's inactive because of some aesthetic concerns with the water quality it produces. So that remains more of a backup role, and you're able to meet demand pretty easily with your remaining sources. All of those wells and the associated pump stations have a capacity of at least 1 million gallons per day. So you can see, based on 2 million gallons a day as your average day, you have plenty of wells at this point to meet your demand. Excuse me. And there's also one booster station out in town. And those are just some photos of what they look like. So again, you can see nice looking utility buildings, all in pretty good condition, with a few older components as part of the facility, but overall that's what they look like. The Brook Street pump station is the upper left, Pines is the upper right, one called Moroni is the lower left. That's the one that's inactive currently. And then your award-winning source, Nanatuck wells, are the lower right. So then the third piece of a water system are the storage tanks around town. So you have 3 tanks. You may or may not have seen those around town. One is inactive right now, located on Mount Tom. That had some leakage issues and some associated water quality concerns. So for the time being, that has been drained and is offline. And those are the photos there in the lower right. That's actually below grade, so you can it's a very cool asset. Again, it dates back to 1908 as an open reservoir. Then in 1933, they covered it with a concrete roof with those pillars. So that picture on the right is from inside that tank. So it's a very well-constructed, nice facility. So that has some potential, again, to go back into service, and it's located closest to the center of the city, so it has some value hydraulically that will be examined as part of this project. If you combine all 3 of those tanks together, it's about a little over 7.5 million gallons of storage available, and all the tanks are concrete tanks, which are a good durable type of material for tanks. And there are just pictures of your other 2, Drury Lane and Peaceful Valley tanks. And the last piece of your system, but not least, certainly is the water mains that distribute the drinking water throughout the city. So it's actually 130 miles of water main out there, serving about 5,800 service connections. So those are the points where the water gets withdrawn off the water main and is brought into either a home or an industry. So if you add up how many people live in the different residences that have those service connections, it's 16,000 people who are served by your water system every day of the year. There's also one small pressure zone in the city, so most of the city operates on the same pressure off of the tanks, and based on your elevation, you might have higher or lower pressure. There's one portion where the elevation is just so high, there's an extra pump to push and make sure you've got good pressure in everyone's homes in that area.
So where is that?
That's located in, is it Pomeroy? Is that the street?
Is it? Okay.
So our tasks for the water system, we wanted to assess the condition of all those assets, see what's out there, see if anything's broken, needs fixing. We want to look ahead at what is needed in the future and how to best meet those needs. Those needs may not require more pumping, maybe it's just conservation or making sure we are protecting our resources, and that's the priority as opposed to just pumping more. That's part of the examination we'll do as part of this project. We want to look at operations, make sure that everything is running as efficiently, cost effectively as possible, and meets the new regulations. There are always more regulations coming, especially on drinking water systems that can be a little burdensome. So that's going to be examined as part of the process. Making sure energy use of the facilities, because running large pumps is a major use of power supply in any city. So that you're no exception here. So if you can find ways to be efficient in your energy use, that can really save some operating cost. We're going to do some modeling of your water system, tanks, wells, the whole thing, to determine points of potential risk in the distribution system. You might have leak or fire protection, or there might be lower pressure, and that might help us decide where to focus any projects to upgrade portions of the water system. And then we'll take all those pieces and build it together into sort of an overall capital improvement plan, sort of focusing on infrastructure, but hopefully reflecting all the values that have gone into this overall as water resources management. And I think with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dave, who's going to talk a little bit about wastewater.
Thanks, Dave. Similar to the water system, the city owns a wastewater collection and treatment facility, owns, operates, and maintains. I'm going to be providing a brief description of the different facilities related to the wastewater system. I'll be talking about the project drivers related to the wastewater system, and then briefly talking about some of the tasks that we're performing, similar to what Dave talked about, to try to address some of the concerns related to the wastewater system. So first, I'd like to go through just a brief overview of the wastewater system. This is a map showing the wastewater collection system. The collection system includes about 70 miles of collector sewers throughout the city, and there's essentially almost a sewer below every street within the city, and the vast majority of the population is served by the collection system. The wastewater that discharges into the collection system is conveyed to the city's wastewater treatment facility that's located off of Ferry Street. It's shown by the triangle. The wastewater system was designed so that where possible, the wastewater flows by gravity through slope pipes all the way to the treatment facility. Although in some cases, because of the varying topography in town, that just isn't possible. So in those cases, wastewater pump stations have been built. And these pump stations collect wastewater flow in low-lying areas and pump that water flow up to a higher elevation in the collection system. There's actually 18 wastewater pump stations within the city, so there's quite a few. So what are the project drivers for the wastewater evaluation? The first is age. There are many components within the wastewater system that are becoming quite old. For example, at the wastewater treatment facility, many of the components are over 40 years old. Within the wastewater collection system, there's pipes that are over 100 years old. Condition of the wastewater systems is also a driver for the project, and that really ties in with age, because many of the components are reaching the end of their expected service life. There's been some deterioration over time, so we're going to be looking at condition and trying to identify where improvements need to be made over the next 20 years. Future permit requirements is also a driver, similar to the water system. Right now, the wastewater treatment facility is permitted by the Environmental Protection Agency, so they regulate the wastewater discharge from the treatment facility. Right now, the city is meeting all of their permit requirements, but there is potential for those permit requirements to change and become more stringent as time goes on. In particular, nutrient removal is something that the regulatory officials are looking for treatment facilities to try to address. So we're taking a look at permit requirements as part of the project. And then lastly, energy, because many of the components of the facility are getting old. Some of the equipment is less energy efficient than the more modern equipment that's available. So we'll be looking at where energy improvements might be appropriate in order to save operating costs. So with that, I'd like to talk about some of the wastewater system components. The first being the wastewater treatment facility. The wastewater treatment facility was originally constructed in 1949. At that time, there was a control building and some settling tanks. The facility was significantly upgraded in the 1970s to improve treatment, and many buildings were added to the treatment facility and tankage in order to improve treatment. There were also a couple of upgrades that were performed in 1987 and then in 1996, but those upgrades were a little bit less significant. But there hasn't been a major upgrade to the treatment plant since 1996. The treatment facility currently includes 5 process and control buildings and 12 large concrete structures that are all used to treat the wastewater flow. There's numerous equipment at the wastewater treatment facility. There's pumps and mixers and grinders and conveyors, a whole host of equipment that's necessary in order to treat the wastewater flow. Really, the takeaway here is that the wastewater treatment facility is a very significant asset for the city that needs to be preserved. So these are just a couple of photos of the wastewater treatment facility. The photo to the left is an aerial view. Again, just highlighting the fact that there are several components to the wastewater treatment facility. And then the photo to the right is showing one of the process buildings at the treatment facility and some process tankage in the foreground. One of the more significant concerns at the wastewater treatment facility is the fact that they see some very significant increases in flow in the springtime and when it rains. We believe that these significant increases in flow are related to the fact that there are leaky pipes within the collection system that allow groundwater to get into the pipes. And because groundwater is higher in springtime, they see an increase in flow during that period. We also believe that there are some direct sources of clean water flow that are entering the sewer system that could be from catch basins or roof leaders or roof drains that are directly connected to the sewer system rather than to the stormwater system. So as part of the project, we'll be looking for those sources of clean water flow so that we can eliminate them. But clean water flow is a concern because it takes up capacity within the collection system that could be used to convey more sewage. It takes up capacity at the pump stations and at the treatment facility, and the city pays money to pump and treat this clean water flow. Next, I'd like to talk about the pump stations. As I mentioned earlier, there's 18 municipal wastewater pump stations within the city. They vary in size and type. There are some very large facilities that serve large neighborhoods or areas. And then there are some small pump stations that serve just a handful of homes or just one street. Many of the pump stations are relatively old. 14 of the 18 are over 40 years old. So these are pictures of a few of the pump stations within the city. The top 2 illustrate a couple of the larger pump stations. These are multi-level concrete and masonry structures. The Daly Field pump station is located behind the basketball court and tennis courts at Daly Field. The Liberty Street pump station is located at the Liberty Dip. And then the lower photos are illustrating a couple of the smaller pump stations in the city. Note in particular the East Street North pump station. All the pumping facilities are below grade. All you see above grade is a control panel, so that if you were driving by this, you might not even recognize that this is a pump station. Next, I'd like to talk about the collection system. As I mentioned earlier, there's about 70 miles of mainline sewers within the collection system. In addition to that, the city owns some of the sewer service piping. The service piping is the piping that runs from the buildings in town to the sewer main out in the street. The city owns the portion from the property line to the main. So there's about 35 miles of that piping. There are also pressure pipes within the system. These are pipes that convey the flow that's discharged from the pump stations to the gravity portion of the system. we presented a map showing the age of the collection system to, again, illustrate that there are significant portions of the collection system that are quite old. In fact, about a third of the collection system is over 85 years old. So what are the tasks that we're going to be performing to try to address some of these concerns? Similar to the water evaluation, we're going to be doing a condition assessment. We'll be visiting the wastewater treatment facility and all the pump stations to inventory the assets, determine where improvements are going to be needed over the next 20 years. We're also going to be looking at the collection system and developing a condition assessment for that. That will be a more targeted assessment, and that work is planned for the spring of 2016. For the treatment facility and pump stations, we've already visited those facilities and are evaluating the data that we've collected. Because there are a number of pump stations in the city, we're looking at trying to eliminate a few of them as part of the project. There are some locations where, based on information we have in the collection system and the pump stations, it looks like elimination may be feasible. So we're looking at that as part of the project. Similar to the water evaluation, we're also doing an energy audit to identify the largest energy users within the wastewater collection system. And then once we determine that, we're trying to determine whether it's appropriate to make some improvements to those facilities in order to reduce operating costs. We're also evaluating the processes of the wastewater treatment facility, especially in light of the fact that we expect that there could be some new permit limits coming in the future. And the evaluation will also reflect the fact that there could be some changes in users as time goes on. And then lastly, we'll be looking for those sources of clean water flow. I'm sorry, you have a question?
Just a little bit more on the process evaluation. So what will we be looking at? Is it optimization? Looking to be able to deal with nutrient control using the existing system? Or what do you think are the opportunities there?
Correct. For the most part, we're trying to look at how we can optimize the system to accommodate nutrient control. But depending on what that future limit might be, we might not be able to get all the way with just optimization. So if we can't, we're going to be looking at what else do we need to do. Is it more process tankage in order to remove nitrogen and phosphorus from current nitrogen?
Is there capacity in the system? Is the system designed for a larger volume than currently comes into the system?
Yeah. Yep. The wastewater treatment facility has a design capacity of 3.8 million gallons per day. The current flow to the treatment facility on average is about 1.2 million gallons per day. So there's significantly less flow going into the plant than it was originally designed for. Yes, so we have some flexibility within the facility because of the fact that we've got some lower flows. Yes.
Can you clarify where the ultimate outflow of
Yep.
all this?
Excellent question. Yep.
Post-treatment?
Yep. Yep. So there are actually two outfalls from the wastewater treatment facility. The primary outfall runs through a 2-mile outfall from the plant to the Connecticut River. However, when flows get high, that pipe can't handle all the flow. So a small portion of the flow also will go out to the Manhattan River, which is essentially next to the treatment facility.
So yeah, you see the triangle. You can kind of see the.
Yeah. So here's the treatment facility up here. So there is a pipe that runs from that point all the way to here.
That was it, Dave.
Yeah.
And again, the last time there was a facilities plan done for the wastewater treatment plant was in the mid-90s. So again, that's something that's obsolete.
So the stormwater system, it's definitely different animal than the water and wastewater systems. So what are the drivers for stormwater? I think this is kind of important to jump right in to this is really the obvious improving water quality. Stormwater has been shown to be the largest polluter of our water resources. You know, EPA tackled wastewater treatment, you know, in the 70s and into the 80s, and really got, you know, wastewater discharges cleaned up and industrial discharges. And now the focus is on stormwater. They've realized that the things, you know, a lot of these water bodies they expected to be cleaner aren't, and really looking at the focus is moved on to stormwater. So the permitting is the stormwater systems are permitted under this NIPD's MS4, which is again, we live in a world of acronyms here, right? It's a National Pollution Discharge Elimination Service. System. Sorry, and MS4 it's a municipal separate stormwater system. There's another S in there somewhere, but basically, it's a large acronym for saying, you know, urban stormwater systems. Basically, so all communities that have a quote-unquote urban area are subject to this permitting, and really, it's a permitting that drives a management approach to the system. So historically, these systems have grown out of need. Usually drainage, you know, drives it, and we're constructed through road improvements and developments, and we're fairly unplanned, quite honestly. We're built out of need, and we're kind of evolved that we're fairly unplanned. So the drive is to form a plan around these systems and really manage these systems, which historically haven't been managed. So that's a big driver on stormwater. Certainly flooding, you know, we want to address inadequate systems as well. We want to make sure we're looking at inadequate systems and including that in our projections. And condition, you know, again, there's a lot of pipes out there. I'll show you that, but some of them are old. The rail trail culvert that the washout that occurred there was an issue over the condition of that culvert needing to be addressed. And you know, there's a couple other culverts similar to that one under a similar circumstance that we're looking at as well that need to be addressed. So.
Do we have any combination drain sewers?
Combined sewers? No. Nope. So no, there's no combined sewers. What you might hear is a term SSO. CSO is a combined sewers. I don't think haven't ever been combined sewers, or maybe the water system went away. Separated a while ago. So again, what all this really shows is that the system's pretty extensive. I think what you've seen on the water and the wastewater, and really was meant to be shown by these graphics, is it's a pretty built-out system. You know, the water and the wastewater serves almost the entire community. Well, you know, the stormwater system is similarly extensive throughout the city. So I don't have the exact numbers, but you know, we're looking at not only pipes, but you're looking at swales, culverts, so they could be box culverts. There's different types of culverts, arch culverts, open bottom culverts, and culverts. We're really looking at crossing, you know, whether it's crossing a rail line or a street. All the structures, there's a lot of catch basins, a lot of manholes. We have newly installed water quality structures, which nobody knows how to maintain and are somewhat effective. Some of them, some are better than others, but they're newer type structures. And outfalls, and you got a couple photos there of outfalls. There's a number of outfalls. I forget the exact number. I don't have it included here, but the city's ahead of the curve on the outfalls. They did a full inspection of all the outfalls. Probably, what was it, 2009, I think?
2001. Time flies.
Sorry, 2001. Geez, it does fly, Jim. So, you know, certainly addressing outfalls and discharges from outfalls is a big focus of the stormwater. Retention, detention basins, so all these developments, whether it's residential, commercial development, new developments, have to control stormwater through some sort of retention or detention. So how are those systems being managed and maintained is critical. What we found is a lot of them aren't being maintained or managed, and they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. The streets themselves, how they're, you know, look at de-icing practices, salt and sand, and how often the streets are swept and what type of materials you're laying down on the roads has a big effect on stormwater runoff and the quality of stormwater runoff. And all the municipally owned properties, and that's a big list. Really, we're gonna basically do a very top level audit on all the municipally owned properties. So that gets into parks, athletic fields, schools, city hall, the water department facilities, the wastewater treatment facilities. Really, any municipally owned property has to be managed correctly. You know, in terms of, certainly some of those properties are permitted by the state that have hazardous materials or function as industrial functions like the treatment plant. But the treatment plant has a managed plan for stormwater, but not all municipal facilities do. So part of the thing that the permitting wants us to look at is looking at all municipally owned properties. So it's called a good housekeeping. It's a good housekeeping measure. So again, the tasks are a little different. The water and wastewater kind of follow a prescriptive program. They're looking at, you know, what the drivers are, the needs and condition assessment. The stormwater falls a little bit different of a plan, and basically the tasks are laid out to address the permit requirements. So these permit requirements are coming. There's a draft permit for the state of Massachusetts that's been in draft for a number of years now. It's gone through different iterations, but it's I think the latest that we're anticipating is this spring that permit would become effective. So we've been tracking it. A lot of the things haven't changed in the drafts. So our tasks are focused around addressing those permit requirements as opposed to, you know, a traditional facilities plan process. So a couple of the big ones I've highlighted are illicit discharge detection and elimination, and that is really focused on sampling outfalls, finding sources of pollution, and correcting those sources of pollution. And that's what that illicit IDDE acronym, again, sorry, another acronym, that's what that really addresses. And that's where we'll look at the different watersheds and prioritize watersheds and focus sampling based on the priority of those watersheds. The pollution prevention and good housekeeping is just what I was referring to in terms of the municipally owned assets and really auditing all of those assets. So those are really two very large pieces of what we're taking a look at. The other ones, I think the city's actually in pretty good shape in terms of meeting the requirements. What we're doing now actually will qualify for public education, so part of the process kind of feeds itself, so that's good. You know, the ordinances and regulations were updated in early 2000s, which a lot of communities didn't do. So I think being ahead of the curve in some of those things is going to be a big help. So again, trying to look at future conditions, future development, really, where's the future development going to be, and making sure that we're aware of that. And then again, so once we kind of go through the stormwater management plan, that's going to have recommendations. Some of those recommendations are going to be management based and operational. Some of them are going to be capital, and so we'll include those recommendations in the overall capital planning for the project. Did I put you to sleep with it?
Oh, a little bit.
So again, so overall project status. So now shifting away from stormwater and back into the overall project. And Dave, I don't know if you want to address this. I think you're probably a little bit closer to it than I am, so I'll let you tackle it. So this is, again, that is kind of the stormwater piece. I don't know if there are any questions on the stormwater before we move on. No? Okay.
Yeah, so just to wrap up, now we've gone through the infrastructure a little bit, so just to let you know where we stand on the project and where we're heading on the project in general terms. Generally, overall, we started the initial phases back in April of this year, so we're already a few months in. The initial phases of work here focused on things like data gathering, which means it's a combination of looking at what work has already been done, what's out there as far as the city's master plan and where the community wants to be in 20 years, data for what's going on with the wastewater plant, all that type of thing. And as well as you're fortunate you have a lot of staff for the city who who are long tenured, very experienced, know a heck of a lot about all these systems, and part of this project is trying to get that information down into a form that can be passed on to the next generations of city staff, so that information isn't lost as people start to retire. Existing conditions in the city have been documented as far as how much water is used, how much about the wastewater, what sort of infrastructure is out there. We've gone through projecting where you look like you're going as far as population and directly with that water use and wastewater use, flows and loads to the wastewater plant. GIS mapping, so those maps you saw of the various systems, a lot of specific information about the assets, the material of the pipes, when it was installed, it's a lot of detail that is in a database format where someone can easily determine what's out there, how old it is, and if repairs need to be made, then they can find that. So we've been going through a process of looking at old paper plans, digitizing all that information so that it's in a very compact, usable form going forward. Condition assessments of the different facilities. I think pretty much all your facilities someone's laid eyes on at this point and evaluated, from everything from structural to just the condition of pumps and pipes. Energy evaluations are in progress. That's having people who are very experienced in energy efficiency look at different aspects. And then where we are now and ongoing going forward, we're looking at, having done all that preliminary work, what are the needs looking like they are in the different systems. We're getting going on the hydraulic modeling for the water system at this point to see what that projects as need areas. Sewer investigations are ongoing at this point, and some GIS field work to kind of fill in gaps in that mapping where we don't have paper plans maybe for different parts of the city. We're actually going to have to go out and take some measurements and shots and get that stuff basically surveyed and input into the database. So that's generally where we are right now. So we're moving out of the establishing where we are and what exists and getting into what are the needs, and then we'll especially be looking for input from all of you on how we start to prioritize those needs and what makes the most sense to the best way to attack those going forward. Yeah, so I guess next steps from here are just, we're very glad all of you took time out of your own time to come out and hear this tonight and learn a little bit about the project. We're hoping you remain involved in the project and give us your input, because that really is how this end product will hopefully best serve the city. Going forward, as Neil mentioned, we do a more detailed workshop planned where we'll get into some real detail on what the condition assessment showed and what the needs analysis shows, why, some very specifics on what that's all about, and getting some feedback on what people are responding to and what seems more important than another. Then we'll get into a next phase later on would be alternatives analysis, where having identified the needs, we'll start to look at ways to address that need. And one of the advantages of this integrated approach is we may be able to address the needs by doing things in other parts of your citywide system, maybe not directly related. So maybe we don't need a bigger water pump station. Maybe all we need to do is change conservation. Or maybe there's some ways to address needs comprehensively as opposed to infrastructure focused. So we'll go through that process, present different alternatives, get people's response on what seems to make sense and be suitable. And then the final workshop would be sort of the presentation of what we come up with as a team here and what looks like the plan going forward, and give everyone a final chance to see that and what that's all about. And then I guess a public hearing there I think is required under the, because DEP is also interested in approving the plan and seeing what the city's got planned, so there'll be a public hearing at the end to kind of present final work. So that's the end of what we had prepared to present to everyone. For anyone in the team here, if anyone has any initial thoughts, reactions, comments, or questions, this is the time to get that done.
Just a comment. I can't help but think that this phase of your work the data collecting, documentation, determining where the weaknesses are, the strengths are, everything else can certainly help out the individual departments and where they need to go, you know, with future expenditures for upkeep and everything else. So that seems like it's a really worthwhile phase of the project in here, I think, for the city and for the city departments to use as kind of like tangible evidence of, you know, their system and the distribution of it and everything else. But it's very good for that.
Could you just touch on the some of the benefits of this plan, other than the obvious ones you went through, that improving our systems? There's some residual benefits in terms of grants, availability of grants, and borrowing.
Yeah, that's a great point, Jim. The state has a state revolving fund low interest loan program available to municipalities to fund infrastructure projects and projects that are identified through a process like this project will take you through, looking at integrated water resource management. If a project is identified through that, the city has the opportunity to get some very low interest borrowing from the state to fund those projects because they've already been truthed out and looked at in a comprehensive way. So that's something that will save the city borrowing costs down the road for the projects that are ultimately determined to pursue.
Andy Fisk with the Connecticut River Watershed Council. Thank you for the invite. Joe, you're to be commended. Doing this work is really very incredibly important for municipalities. I think the opportunity to think through all of those systems together can produce a lot of benefits. And you sequence what's the most important thing to do first, second, third. I think, is there, I mean, you envision, well, so EPA, what, 5 years ago said municipalities do this because, you know, EPA or the state has siloed these programs for so long, and municipalities have said, well, wait a minute, you've told us we got to do all this stuff on wastewater, but water is more important, and so EPA said, okay, put them all together and prioritize. So do you envision, after this is done, working with DEP or EPA to actually sequence infrastructure in the context of permits and saying, all right, we got a wastewater permit coming up and nutrients are coming at us, and we've got the MS4, and do you see that happening after the report being done? Because that's a great opportunity. It begs a lot of questions and issues, but you know, I think it makes sense to think about.
I absolutely see that happening. We've had competing programs or competing departments for so long that when we chose one, we didn't really know if that was the right one. Well, this plan is going to tell us which is the right one, and we're going to know what's coming out. We're going to have an idea of what's coming out. We're going to have an idea of where we should be going next. So, yeah, I can see that out of the three, we're always going to have one that bubbles up to the top as a priority. That's where we should be going with at this point in time.
Yeah, DEP, we've communicated the scope of work with them. They reviewed it. They had some comments. We met with them early on just to let them know that this is what we were doing. And then once we had developed a detailed scope of work, we sat down with them and solicited their feedback. And they were very open, gave us a lot of feedback. They were very appreciative of the effort of the city, that's for sure. And so we've incorporated that, and within our deliverables, they will also provide comments along the way. So we certainly don't want any surprises in the final report. You know, in terms of the needs on the wastewater side, the permitting is a big driver. You know, where's the permitting going, and how that is going to you know, drive when and how much money needs to be spent at the plant. So yeah, it's an important part of this whole process is keeping them involved. And you know, as Jim alluded to before, it's going through this and them agreeing with what we're doing will give the city priority in terms of its available clean water funding as well. And so definitely an important part of it.
The other thing, this document is going to be very important when we go to the mayor and city council looking for funding for a project. It's gonna take all the guesswork out of it. It's gonna say, here, we spent this money on this. Here's the top priority project this year. There should be no debate on it. There should be no saying, well, geez, maybe we should be doing that project. This is gonna make our planning and our implementation so much easier.
I had a chance to hear the governor interviewed this past week, and one of the things that caught my ear was the fact that he's dead set against unfunded mandates, but I don't see that as being the case with EPA, the federal side.
Well, stormwater has been labeled an unfunded mandate since the day it was released, and EPA, I tell you, Massachusetts has certainly made their voice heard in the residents and the reviews of what they feel is appropriate and how much this is going to cost. And EPA has, I believe, answered through their drafts, and a lot of the things that are going to cost money, a lot of the big ticket items like sampling, regular sampling, continues to be put forth in the drafts. So I think they hear you, but I think the regulations, the iterations of drafts keep reinforcing some of the same things that are going to certainly put a burden on the city and every community, quite honestly, in the state. So I'm not sure what the governor.
I wasn't talking about public
opinion.
works type of stuff, but just the whole concept of.
It is, and it's looming. I think the cities took advantage of some funding early on in the program and got some preliminary work done that we're going to build off of. But it's coming. Other regions of EPA have adopted it. Other states that have, EPA owns it in Massachusetts. Other states have taken management of this program and implemented it beyond where Massachusetts is successfully. And the driver in stormwater is, I think they're pushing, what they'd like to see is all communities enter into a utility type situation, so that you can generate dedicated funds to address the management of stormwater. And currently, it's basically taken out of the general fund. The Chapter 90 money is really where it's spent, right? It's not coming out of the water or sewer budgets, it's coming out of general fund to manage the system. And there's a lot of competition on those funds. So.
I thank you for the presentation. And it looks like you're taking a real global approach to this sourcing to wastewater treatment. I guess my question is about when you're doing an analysis of prioritization of projects. Is part of that analysis also going to look at the actual usage of the water in East Hampton? Because I guess I think that how the water gets used is an important piece of this puzzle. I didn't really hear anything on that, but is that going to be part of the?
Yeah, as far as drinking water usage specifically, is that?
Well, just how, what it gets used for. What the demand is. You have 2 million gallons a day coming in, 1.2 million went out, 60% is in the system, 40% goes somewhere. Where's the water? All those questions.
Yep, we absolutely are going to do that, and that's already well in progress. We know a lot about where, as far as drinking water, how much is going to residents versus industry versus being lost through leaky pipes out in the system, because it is a pressure, water is pressurized, so you generally are going to lose some percentage just out in the distribution system. And then as far as how much goes into the wastewater system and how much inflow there is into the wastewater system, so there's sort of a large water balance that's being done as part of this to help figure out where we should be attacking is what's our real problem here and how do we focus on the real issue. When Dave showed the infiltration graph, that's the type of information that helps you say, well, maybe we don't need a bigger treatment plant, maybe we just need to fix some leaks out in the sewer system, and that's the way to prioritize.
I think the water supply you have is a tremendous asset, and we want to, we certainly want to leverage that asset. The quality of the water and having excess supply is a tremendous asset, and bringing revenue to the city and using that asset is key. And I know that there's been a couple successful breweries that have come to town, and things like that. And again, leveraging that asset and that supply, that quality supply, is important, and that we understand that and are making decisions toward that, and are important.
What do you think the timing is for your second workshop?
What's that?
The second workshop?
The timing of it?
Yeah.
We're thinking, we were originally thinking before Christmas, but we were delayed with some of the field work on the SSES side. The conditions haven't been just too dry to do any of the sewer investigations that we would have liked to have done. So with the holiday, I think we're thinking about pushing that one back till after the holidays, to January, winter time frame, depending on how much of that field work we get completed. And then I think the third one, maybe
Yeah, it would
a few
be
months after.
subsequent to probably late in the year, something like fall 2016, probably as alternatives analysis, and we wrap up toward the end of that year.
Pretty staggered, not right away. It'll allow us to get some runway on the work that we're doing, and certainly have some results sufficient enough to meet again. So I think, I'd like to hear if you certainly like what you heard and want to be involved. I think that's something we definitely want to know about. So I've got a list here of the sign-in. If you, again, want to be included in what consider our key stakeholders, we'll let you know when our postings are. We're trying to post things to the, can you flip the slide forward there, to the city's website. So on the Board of Public Works page, there's a forms and documents section. So if you go to easthampton.org, Departments, Public Works, Forms and Documents, we'll be posting interim documents there. Certainly announcements of meetings, things like that will be circulated. But I think what's up there now is
Some introductory material on what
Put
an
this
IWRMP.
presentation up there?
Yeah, that's the thought, is we'll put that up there, but there's also just some general background on what the project is, but this will be more in depth.
So if you want to come up, I guess when we're done, I don't want to rush anyone, we can take plenty of questions. I'd like to just hear from you. I'll put a little asterisk next to your name, make sure that you're included on future correspondences.
Very good. I want to thank you all for coming tonight, spending some time with us.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.